listening to TMI for the week of June 4th, 2018.
You live in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
You worked on Comedy Central's Review at Key and Peele.
Yes.
You started at 15 in Philadelphia.
Uh-huh.
Moved to Boston. You also went to Emerson College. What were you studying there?
I studied, broadcast journalism and political science.
Wow. So this
Thank
is
you.
well, this was something I was wondering about was how involved in issues and the news and Trump and politics are you?
I would say that I'm very aware. I read the news every day, and then I'm a person with opinions. So, there's certain things where I think I do a pretty good job of admitting when I'm in over my head. But, I'm pretty up on things, I hope.
Wow.
Unfortunately.
How I noticed that you work a lot of college crowds. What kind of self-editing?
I've done a decent... I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, well, what kind of self-editing do you have to do? Is there a limit beyond which you don't want to cross and get too serious? I mean, there's some people would think that a lot of this stuff isn't funny.
Right. So I actually, for a period of time, I would do maybe 4 or 5 a year, but I actually don't do... I would love to do more colleges, actually. I have a different opinion than a lot of more established comics that you've heard in the past few years talk about college crowds. I actually, my performance, maybe they wouldn't agree with me, but I like them. So, I don't get to do that many because I don't really change my act. And I also swear a lot, which automatically disqualifies the tape from being used. So, but yeah, to answer your question, I don't really change my act. If they say, hey, don't talk about religious stuff or, homophobic or transphobic or racist things, I don't do that anyway, obviously. So, I've really never had a problem with what colleges have asked me to do. The main problem is can I swear on this podcast? Do you mind?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I say fucking shit a lot. So that is primarily, it's not the topics of my stand-up, it's more swearing that has prevented me from doing more colleges, and my agent and I will be having a talk about that this week.
Uh-oh. How old are you? I'm trying to figure out if there's a bit of a generation divide.
First of all, how dare you? No,
Yeah.
I'm 29.
29?
29 years old.
Okay, so I'm 53. And
Okay.
a lot of the comedians that obviously I feel like I'm more connected with are of an older crowd. And when often we hear interviews done on older comedians, even older than 53, we're really just hearing about the past in terms of trying to figure out where we are and how things are moving forward into the future. It's younger comedians that you want to talk to.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So what can you say about that? What do you notice about the difference in your observations or what you think plays? What do you think are the differences between the crowds, the generations?
I think the biggest thing that has to do with it is the internet. And also, I think, well, not even just the internet, to limit it to that, I think technology in general has really changed things. And in both a micro and macro way, I think the micro of it would be, for instance, it's not considered rude with a younger generation. And I actually put this even younger than I am, because I think because I kind of started stand-up so early, I was around people who were, just age-wise older than I am, and I've kind of picked up a lot of social cues, I think, from generations that are a little older than I am. So I may not be the best voice to speak about the younger generation, but from my point of view, I guess age-wise, being in the middle, I think that, just to get back to that point that I came so close to making a few seconds ago, but on the micro of it, I think you see the younger generation where it's not considered rude for them to be looking at their phones in a conversation. And I think at first when I would see that, I took that as an affront where, oh, do you not find me interesting? You know, like what's wrong with you? And I would get like offended by it. But I think that I've actually been giving them more leeway with that younger generation where that's what they grew up with. You know, like they've had this technology, and I think you literally have the entire world in like this little rectangle that's flat in your hand. How are you not going to look at that? You know, where I think with myself and older generations, it's like, oh no, just have a human conversation. But this younger generation has been exposed to the most captivating thing on earth. How are you not theoretically going to look at that? So that's the micro of it. And then I think on a macro level, you know, like that programming is that I think that just affects, like that has kind of maybe stunted growth with eye contact or getting to know and talk to people, you know, that sort of thing. So I think that the younger generation has those same skills. I just think it's been deprogrammed, ironically, by tech, if that makes any sense.
Well, it's kind of central to my desire to understand this. And, you know, I have a couple examples I'll get to of, you know, overuse of the phone and how it makes somebody my age feel. You touched on it. What am I not interesting or important? Or, you know, is it a status symbol? I'm now wondering, what do they think of people who aren't staring at their phones? They don't have a phone? Like, they don't read? Like, I just wonder what goes... Because the judgment must work both ways. Like, if I'm not completely occupied swiping viciously, it must say something about me. I'm not part of the party.
I think that's really interesting. Yeah, I've felt that way as well, where this is a weird thing, but like my phone just didn't work for like a couple weeks. There was something wrong with the chip in my iPhone. So when I was off of Wi-Fi, I just couldn't use it because the cellular data didn't work on it. So it was a thing where when I was in an elevator with people, everyone would be on their phone and I wasn't. And I felt like I looked like a sociopath because I almost just like stared at it just to have, because it's a prop. It's almost a crutch in a social, that's not even a social situation, but being around people. I was alone in not alone in an elevator. I was in an elevator with other people and they're all staring at their phones and I'm staring ahead. And I was worried, like, is this guy going to kill us? Why else wouldn't he be on his phone? It was a very strange feeling. So I can relate. Just
to show how central this is to my thinkology right now. Just today I was in the elevator and I was on with a good-looking young lady and I couldn't help myself. I said, "Oh, you're the first person I've been in an elevator with who hasn't got their phone." And she pointed out that in one hand she had her bag and the other a Starbucks. So it wasn't possible. So that was
the only
was
limitation was that she only had two hands.
Yeah.
Right.
Back to your bio, just so we can work through this. Because I'm not sure how up to date this is, but College Humor Live Tour and the Rooftop Aspen Comedy Festival, the Seattle International Comedy Competition, San Francisco Sketch Fest, and the Laughing Skull Comedy Festival. Would you add to those?
Yeah, so those are all things I've done for sure.
Yeah.
I think it's important always for stand-up comedians to have stand-up related credits in their bio, which is strange to say, but I was lucky enough to have like a guest starring role on a Comedy Central show, and I've written for a couple Comedy Central projects and stuff, but I made an appearance on this ABC thing called the Watch Party The Bachelor, where I was a comedian guest on that, but yeah, I think, like, which, you know, for whatever reason, if you hear, television obviously sounds more impressive than stand-up, but I've noticed the thing out in Los Angeles in particular, where a stand-up comedian will be going on stage, and the host will introduce them and give their credit. And if the credit is just like, you may have seen this next comic in a national commercial for Petco, and he's been in a pilot on this thing. And it's like, well, that's not the job they're about to do. Like, they're not about to act. They're about to do stand-up comedy. So, yeah, it's just a weird pet peeve / like a hyper awareness of, where no one, the average person probably doesn't know what the hell the Seattle International Comedy Competition is. I barely know what it is. But I think it's important to have stand-up credits if, you're a stand-up first, which is what I am.
Yeah. That was just that paragraph, I think. Okay, well, I'll go on. Also,
okay, cool.
Another one, Philadelphia Magazine named you one of the funniest Philadelphia tweeters.
Yes, and they are correct.
Well, I have a couple examples.
Okay, cool.
A recent tweet, please call me Blake. Papua New Guinea is my father's name. It's like, I don't know, how do you come up with this? Another one I thought was revealing, not just for myself, but probably for you. You were explaining that you actually just used the phrase, do you have any idea how self-involved I am? You used that as a defense in an argument with your girlfriend. Yeah, it's always the same thing when I hear comedians in any form they're in. It's always, why didn't I think of that? There should be a show. Why didn't I think of that? In fact, that could be copyright. But
that's really funny.
It's the underlying tone. It's my underlying thought whenever I'm listening to comedy, just over and over and over and over. So how do you think of that?
Yeah, that's natural.
Yeah. How do you think?
Yeah, I think that
is that from a lifestyle of just going to movies and playing video games all day? I mean, if I did that, could I come up with this stuff?
I think it's all life experience.
Yeah.
So with stand-up, my favorite stand-up comedians and something that I strive to do myself is, and I think it actually comes, speaking of age and experience, it comes with age, where I think you just need to have a really strong, unique point of view. And in order to establish a point of view or to be able to evoke that on stage in front of an audience, I think you do need to be self-involved to a point, I guess. And by the way, I really do try my best to be like an incredibly giving and caring person, but you have to balance the two. Yeah. Where I don't think that you need to be an asshole to be a great comedian. So there are a lot of great comedians who are assholes. That being said, but I don't think it's you need to have one to have the other. So I just think you need to do a lot of introspective work, or just kind of give yourself away to the craziness of having all right, I realize I don't know, this is a weird statement, but almost the lack of self-awareness at times, where if, for instance, that tweet, if I was obviously someone who uses the argument, hey, I am very self-involved, you should know this, is an insane person that you shouldn't be around, but but then again, if you're that self-aware that you don't say something like that outwardly, then maybe you don't get a chance to have a funny joke. So I think there's a balance, if that makes any sense.
That's interesting. Back to your bio.
Cool.
You currently live in Los Angeles. How's that going? But we'll get to that.
Okay,
you've written for Comedy Central. You've guest starred in the final season of The Review. You have an album which was number 6 on iTunes in 2016, the Blake album. And you were, as you mentioned, the first comedy writer and comedian to appear on the ABC Snapchat show Watch Party in the episode The Bachelor.
Just looked at my website the other day, and I maybe have not updated it, but the last thing would be Todd Glass, who was a guest on this. And I should mention I'm on a treadmill as well. No, I'm just kidding.
No.
I listened to part of the episode. And Todd's one of my best friends. I would say 89% of our conversations happen when he's on the treadmill, so please don't take that personally.
No, I didn't. I was very...
Yeah, but also good for him for staying in shape. So Todd and I released an album. I think that would maybe be the last credit of. It's called 12 Years of Voicemails from Todd Glass to Blake Wexler.
Right.
And we were lucky enough for that to go #1 on Amazon and iTunes. And then I think it charted on the Billboard charts also. But it was basically, I've known Todd since I was 15 when I first started stand-up. And I've saved his voicemails to me for over 12 years.
Wow.
And if you ever talk to Todd, or like Todd's ever left you a voicemail, he leaves the funniest voicemails. And also, like, it's like basically he constructs a perfectly fine-tuned comedy bit, but just for you.
Wow.
And I saved them over the years, and it also kind of shows the chronology of our friendship, where when I first met him, I was a big fan of his, and I was like a kid in high school and just started stand-up, and then it was very nice. And the first voicemail actually is him leaving my dad and I tickets at Helium Comedy Club in Philadelphia for one of his shows. And then it kind of transforms where he keeps leaving me voicemails and gives me advice. He tells me to drop out of college at one point to be a comedian, which I didn't do, but was very flattering. And he even gives me like this real, they're all hysterically funny, but he even gives me at one point this really heartfelt breakup advice where I had this bad breakup with this girl, and he left this really sweet voicemail, and we included it on the podcast. So, yeah, it's a thing that like I obviously have a lot of affection for, because it's not just a very funny thing, but it's a thing that, you know, one of my close friends and I made together. So, yeah, that was a very long way of saying that another credit is I did an album with Todd.
Wow. Yeah, I forgot that one. Now that sounds great. And so I guess it's from tape. You must have put a lot of effort into editing that together and cleaning it up and organizing.
Yeah, it was. So it started where I think I had a flip phone when I first started, you know, like one of those, like, I don't know how to describe it. I guess it's just like a singular wireless flip phone. And I would record it into my laptop. So that was the one channel. I'm such a pack rat with that stuff. I save like a lot of voicemails from my parents and then my friends on my birthday and stuff. So I do save a lot anyway. So I've gone through one or two laptops since then, but luckily I had this old hard drive that I kept them all on. And so that was the first issue, where there were some actually that we couldn't even include because I just lacked the audio engineering capabilities throughout my life to make them sound okay. But luckily, I mean, a lot of it was just luck, where like the hard drive didn't get destroyed, or I didn't lose them, or my there's a very funny comedian, one of the funniest comedians ever in my opinion, Rory Scovel, has actually texted me after we released it, and he said, "Dude, I'm so glad you did this because I saved 2 years worth of Todd's, but they got erased from my phone." So I think my neuroticism was the one thing that really made that a success.
One more time, it's called
12 Years of Voicemails from Todd Glass to Blake Wexler.
Great. What is it about Philadelphia? There seems to be a whole pile of comedians coming out of there. I never really realized it was one of the sort of hubs of comedy. Right? There's a whole bunch of comedians who've come out of...
I thought you were going to say the pile of shit coming out of there, which you may not have been totally wrong about.
Why would it?
Find us on Twitter @ThatArcher, our podcast page, tmi.twxnet.com. Rate the show on iTunes. It changes the way the show is listed.
Had you tried some open mics in Philadelphia?
Yeah, so I had started, I did my first show when I was 15, and by show, I mean, there were these things, like I took a stand-up comedy class, which sounds silly, but it was like offered as like an adult night class kind of situation at a local high school where you paid to take this course or whatever, and, you know, down the hall there was like public speaking, or, you know, like leadership classes, or I don't even know what the hell else they offered, but yeah, my mom wanted to give me some sort of adult life skill, where I was playing baseball and was absolutely terrible at it, and like what was I going to be, a pitcher, for the Boston Red Sox or something. So she's like, you need some sort of skill where if you enter the business world, like she wanted to give me golf lessons or something, like, because apparently people make deals on the golf course.
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea if that's true. But or tennis or like just something. And she gave me a list of these classes, and I saw stand-up comedy, and I was a huge stand-up comedy fan. And I came from like such a supportive household that, like, I know a lot of people are like, how could you even conceptualize doing stand-up? But my parents were so great and continue to be, where they're just like, oh no, you can, do whatever. You can't do baseball, but you could maybe conceivably do stand-up. So I took that class, and it was taught by like a local Philadelphia comic. And at the end of it, like a lot of comedy classes do, they do this thing called a graduation show, where you do like 3 to 5 minutes of any material that you wrote during the class, like that was your homework to try to like write a joke. And I went up, and it's in front of like your friends and family, but I was 15 and it was in a bar, so none of my friends could go because they were all also 15. So it was just my mom and my sister because my dad was away. And I bombed. I just ate shit, and it didn't matter. I was so psyched to be, because in my mind I was just a comedian. Like, I did stand up once when I was 15. I'm like, I am now, I'm like Dana. I don't know why I said Dana Carvey. He's not. This is so. I've been doing stand up for like 13 or 14 years, and I couldn't name a single stand up comedian in that moment. I'm Willis Black or Todd Glass or Sarah Silverman. Yeah, I was just so happy to be a comic, and then I just kept doing it. And my mom was sweet enough to take me to like a bar show, an open mic at a bar, in a weird part of Philadelphia at 10:30 on a Tuesday night. And because I couldn't drive yet, so she would drive me to shows, and I just kind of got hooked on it. And then I obviously, my schedule was dependent on whether or not my mother could drive me to shows at first. So I do a show maybe once every month, I think, at first. And then when I could drive myself to open mics and, do some shows. So
what did your friends think of that?
It was cool. Like, my friends, it was funny where we were all very, I don't know if we were competitive, but I guess we were competitive with each other. And just, I had a tight group of like 5 or 6 best friends, and we were all like basically brothers and very close. So I think whenever one of us would accomplish something, whether it was our friend who like won a basketball championship or something, we'd always like tear each other down, which I think may have had some lasting effects on my psyche. But so at first, like, they would give me shit, or like, oh, Blake's doing stand up. But then they really had a lot of fun, I think, seeing all the weirdos who would do shows with me, because when you first start, you're not on shows with, comics who've been on Comedy Central or whatever. Like, you're on shows with a lot of weird people who probably aren't all there mentally. And it's just like strange people who probably, 99.999% of them will quit stand-up within the next year or two. So it was a very strange thing where I think they like, my material was terrible because I was very young, but I think they really enjoyed going to the things because, they were 16 or 17, and because they went with my parents, they could go into a bar, and watch all these weirdos talk about stuff that they probably wouldn't have heard, on TV, because it was absolutely filthy what a lot of comics would talk about when you first start out. So, they were really supportive, but, like, it was just like anything else with them and my group of friends where, if I got like a big head about myself, or if I did well at an open mic, they'd be like, you suck, and it would bring me back down to earth. So I think meaningfully they were very supportive, but there was also like, dude, you're not even good at this, which I think is healthy.
Yeah, it's mean preening.
Yes, well put.
What do you think the early warning signs are that you might be raising a comedian?
That's a good way of putting it. There should be some sort of Surgeon General warning on a child's foot or something if they show.
Things to watch for.
Things to watch for. I would say just, it's interesting because I was never really a class clown. So I think I was I've been very polite throughout my life. So like yelling out fart noises and stuff in a class was never really something I did. It'd make me laugh when other people did it, but I would say that would be a warning sign. I would say for a lot of comics, substance abuse at a young age, I'd say would be a warning sign for sure. But I don't know, maybe let's not even go negative with it. Like, let's go positive with it. And I'm talking to myself right now. I'll go positive with it. Like, I think having an outgoing personality and, like an interest in it, like if your kid is watching stand-up all the time, why not let your kid try it? Like, It's not, Todd actually has a really good point of view on this, where he'll say, well, listen, like if your kid wants to be a lawyer, then send your kid to law school. But if your kid wants to be a comedian, then send your kid to an open mic. Like it is actually just as legitimate of a job as anything else. There's just a different career path where it's not as well defined, like where you can have a stand-up. Instead, like you don't go like, undergrad and then grad school and law school. Like there's not that trajectory. It could be go to an open mic, start a YouTube show, just keep doing stand-up, write a script. There's a bunch of different ways to do it, but it's not some sort of far-fetched idea that you can be successful as a stand-up.
Not all kids are watching 24/7 comedy and reciting whatever they saw on whatever show, Letterman or whatever it was, the next day with all their friends. I mean, I was interested in comedy when I was sort of a teenager. I think actually a bad moment for me was there was that Mystery Science Theater. And I, loved it. And I watched, at that time there was a lot of reruns of Live at the Improv, and it seemed to be just a flood of stand-up available. But watching that show, something that really discouraged me was I didn't realize, because I guess I wasn't as smart as I think I am, we're watching these three characters make comment on this movie, and they're all interesting and entertaining, and they turn a horrible movie into an interesting movie. The thing that intimidated me was how did they come up with that stuff, back to that original theme, so quickly? And I didn't really realize that it was edited and written and re-edited and pieced together and rehearsed and all of that. The idea, and then you watch somebody like Letterman at the time, in his early days of Letterman, when he was, super lightning fast and again, just pulling things out of the air. It was always unclear in these staged comedy situations how much of it is literally off the top of your head and how much of it is already rehearsed.
Right.
And it's intimidating.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It is. And that is an interesting thing as well. I've never really thought about that, where it's funny where you see, like, you see someone on Letterman or like nowadays like a Netflix special, where it can seem so intimidating. Where it's like, God, look how good this person is now. Like how much of this, like how do they come up with all this stuff? But I guess maybe it should be intimidating a little bit too, because the people who get things, it's almost generally like 7 to 10 years before you get something that big. Like the internet is now speeding that up a little bit, but even a guy like, a lot of people point to someone like Michael Che or something, who is one of the Weekend Update guys on SNL, and a very funny stand-up, where people are like, God, this guy came out of nowhere, But no, he broke, quote unquote, early, had been grinding away at open mics and shows for like 4 or 5 years, and like doing 5 or 6 shows a night. So it's really, I guess it is, it's exactly as intimidating as it should be, because if you're willing to put in that kind of work, you can get there too. But it is a lot of work. It's like an amazingly fun job, but it is still, you do need to bring like a work ethic to it, I think.
It's interesting how there's different parts of the brain, seems to me, that are involved. I know just from doing this podcast, there's an interesting difference between recital and riffing.
Yes.
What the hell is that? And it's so profound. It's as if it utterly comes from two different parts of your brain.
Yeah,
It's remarkable.
yeah, you put that really well.
Like, I mean,
Like,
just try
I
to
think
read a script, and it's it's just so different than riffing. I'll
and if
never
you
get
need
over it.
to, but if you're reading a script in your head, you need to make it sound like you're not.
Right.
And that's like the craziest thing,
Yeah.
where you can see someone doing a joke and you're like, wow, like what a fresh, way that they're delivering that. But they've done that joke maybe 150, like 400 times, So that's the thing. That's a very delicate balance. And then riffing, I think, is, like I'll do jokes on stage that I've done, hundreds of times, and I'll do it one night and it may not do that well, and then I'll say something right off the top of my head that isn't even, like time sensitive. It's not even like a current event or something. It's just something I came up on the spot, and it'll blow away reaction wise the joke that I've been crafting, for years. And it's just such a funny thing. And comedy's so subjective anyway, where it's hard to take. It's difficult to take cues from each show, because when you go back and think why a joke worked, why it didn't, you have to take into account, did I write this in a funny way? Did I deliver it in a funny way? Was there something going on in the audience that night where, maybe I misread the audience and it wasn't the right audience for that joke? Or it could be maybe someone went up before me that was absolutely hysterical and kind of, fatigued the audience a little bit, and then I didn't do that well. Or did I not, did I not do the right thing after a high energy comic and bring the energy back down and then build it back up to where I want it? Like, there's just so many variables where the longer you do it, the quicker you can work through those variables, where it's almost like some sort of software program, where my software program is now more advanced because I've been doing it for so long, where when I first started, it would take longer to process all those variables. So yeah, it is interesting. I love riffing. Like, riffing's a thing that I've gotten more into in the past few years as I've gotten more confident on stage, because if a riff isn't doing well, I can go back to the material that I've written out beforehand. But it is a really fun feeling of just saying something off the top of your head and just being like, hey, I don't know if this is going to work or not. And that's exciting.
It's fascinating. I expect that all comedians spent a lot of time in the principal's office.
No, I didn't.
Very often they aren't the bad kids.
Right.
What's with that? Because you'd think that loudmouth, the kids, and this is another sort of thing. I knew as a kid that, there were two types of kids, and we're back to riffing here. Like, just, when you're playing one of these role-playing games, like, there's just some kids who just can go to keep going, and if they're playing space, like they're doing the radio calls, some kids have it and some kids don't. You expect the ones that are good at riffing will become comedians. You expect the ones who spend most of their time counting the minutes away waiting in the principal's office. Those are the comedians. Not in your case.
Yeah.
You were a good kid.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think it depends some of the funniest people I've ever met in my life, I would say most of the funniest people I've ever met are not stand-up comedians.
Yeah.
So I think it just depends on what you want. Like, I think people who want to make people laugh. I think class clowns or kids in school who are funny, it's are they being funny for attention? Are they being funny because they love to make people laugh, or is it some combination of both? So
they're making themselves laugh.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Yeah, I think it's some combination of that equation.
Interesting. How do the steps fit together going from Philadelphia to Boston and then LA?
So it was a very calculated thing that I did, even at that age, where when I first started doing stand-up in high school, I just knew I wanted to do stand-up, and that was it. Like, there was no plan to become like a businessman or something after that. So when I first started doing stand-up in high school, I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to go to college, and a lot of people from where I grew up, like that was the standard step process where you go to high school, you go to a good college, you graduate from that college, and then you do your career. That the time when I was going to deviate was that my career wasn't going to be, in finance. It was going to be standing on a stage and talking at people. So, but in my mind, I wasn't ready to break away from that, I think, step-by-step process yet. So starting out doing stand-up in high school, I wanted to go to a college in a town that was a great stand-up comedy town. And if I could find stand-up comedians who went to that college as well, that was an incredible bonus. So I looked at cities like New York, LA, and then Boston was the other city that I looked at. And because I had already started consuming, like reading stand-up comedy books, listening to podcasts, I heard that like LA and New York were the two huge towns, but if you moved there too early, you could kind of get buried because, I mean, if I moved to LA when I like right out of high school, I think I would still be doing stand-up because it's like the thing that I love more than anything else in life, but it would have been really hard because when you move out here, no matter what kind of stand-up you are, and the same goes for New York, you're competing for spots with all of the funniest people on earth. So when I put my name into the Improv for spots, I'm on the same email as, Daniel Tosh, Sarah Silverman, Dave Chappelle. You know what I mean? Like, that's the same email. They get those spots way more often than I do, but it's the same email. And then when you first move here, it's also all the funniest people live in New York and LA, and also all the least funny people live here. So you're competing for the same open mic spot as literally 200 other people, and some of them are wearing, like a radio on their head, and they're screaming and all this. Like, they're very strange people where if you start in a city that isn't New York or LA, that open mic sign-up total drops to 20 people or 30 people, and it's a lot more manageable. So I decided to go to Boston because tons of my favorite stand-ups came out of Boston.
Right.
And it was also a thing called a feeder city, Feeder, where a lot of great comics that filter into New York and LA come from American cities. And Toronto as well has also produced a lot of great comics over the years, but they'll come from American cities like Boston, Chicago, Austin, Texas, San Francisco, Seattle. Like, those are the 5 big cities where Portland, that a ton of great comics have come out of. So I looked up schools in Boston, and I applied to Boston University and was waitlisted there. And I applied to Emerson, where I was accepted. And Emerson, I had found out that the list of comedians that have come out of Emerson is insane. Bill Burr, recently Dan Levy, Joe Mandy, Harris Whittles, rest in peace, Jen Kirkman, Jay Leno, Dennis Leary, Anthony Clark. I know I'm forgetting like a bunch of really funny stand-ups, but the list of like that's Stephen Wright came out of Emerson. The list is absolutely insane. Henry Winkler went there, who is not necessarily stand-up, but another comedy person. So I went there, and I remember emailing, I MySpace messaged Bill Burr before I went there, and I was like, "Hey man, I'm a young comic coming out of Philadelphia, and I want to go to college. Like, did you like Emerson? Did it help your stand-up career? Can I have some advice about Boston?" And he was very, very sweet to me and told me that the advice just like get up as much as possible, get as many hours under your belt as you can, and don't take any shit was another piece of advice that he gave me. So I did stand up. I'm trying not to make this go on for too long, but I did stand up throughout my time at Emerson, and I did stand up at Emerson College, where we had like a comedy group at the school. Like, that's how much comedy is in the bloodstream of Emerson, where there was a stand-up comedy group there. So I could take an elevator down in my dorm to a little black box theater and perform in front of 200 people that were my age. It was crazy. And now, actually, this happened after I graduated, but you can major in comedy at Emerson now, which is amazing. So, and also I'm not sure how that makes a lot of people's parents feel, but you can major in comedy. So after that, I did this, or while I was there, I got into this college competition that Rooftop Comedy put on, and I went to Aspen as part of the finals of it for their comedy festival, and I met this woman who worked at Comedy Central, and years later I asked for an internship at Comedy Central my senior year of college, and she gave it to me. And then after that period of time, I had that connection to LA, and I met a lot of people out here. Todd was out here when I was interning, so that was the natural move for me after college.
Wow. So you met Todd once you'd moved. No, you had already known Todd.
I had met him. I had known him for years. I met him when I was 15 or 16. Yeah. So he had been supportive since then.
So he was somebody you already knew in LA when you moved out there.
Right. Yeah. And he was incredible where there's so many comedians out here. So having like this stamp of approval, so to speak, of a guy like Todd, who everyone respects so much, I think went a long way, where when I would ask for a set on like a showcase out here, they'd be like, oh, I wasn't just a blank name, hopefully, to a lot of people. They'd think, oh, this is someone that Todd Glass thinks is funny or is friends with Todd. So, that helped me stand out a little bit.
You've been on the Todd Glass show a lot.
Yes. Yeah.
Were you involved in the mechanics of the show? Like there's a bunch, there's sort of an entourage.
That's inferring that there are mechanics. No, there are. I was, early on, I would help. I just wanted to do whatever I could, to help. It was such a cool, and is such a cool thing where, first of all, it wasn't lost upon me that, Todd and I became very close friends, but it still wasn't, and still isn't lost upon me where it's like, oh, right, this is a guy that I'm legitimately a fan of, which is a strange thing to say about a friend now, but that is how the friendship started. So it was still a really cool thing where, Todd would be like, hey, can you pick up some, food for the podcast when you come? And just being able to hang out with, and obviously he'd reimburse me. It's like, he would kill me if I didn't bring that part up. But it was a really cool thing for me to go to this podcast studio and, sit next to Norm Macdonald and sit next to people like Sarah Silverman or Jeselnik or people like that. That was just an incredibly cool. That was so cool to me and still is. So, so that's kind of how, I started with that. And then he'd let me sit in and sometimes be a guest, which meant a lot to me and means a lot to me. So, it's just a place where it's funny just to talk about a podcast as, just in such high regards, but it is such a unique experience that Todd sets up where he makes everyone feel so welcome. It's literally like being a guest on, Letterman or Kimmel or something like that. He really makes everyone feel so special and has all these, accommodations for everybody. And it is its own world where both from the decor that he sets up to the lighting and all the bits, it really is its own world that I almost, I really hope everyone, could have that experience where it's hard to even describe how cool it is and unique. So, that's my trajectory with the podcast.
It makes sense to me that you'd have to make an interesting sort of safe place to do sort of improvisational riffing. You have to, you don't just snap your fingers and everybody's comfortable. Right, and especially because Todd's the thing that makes that podcast what it is. So, and Todd is, and I mean this as a compliment, particular in that he likes things the way that he likes things, and that's what maximizes. So, let's say I'm taking out my friend Todd here. I'm substituting his name with talent. So if you have this talent that is incredibly talented, and in order for him to be as talented as he can be and make the show as good as his talent can do, you need that talent to be totally comfortable and with where he is or he or she is. So to apply that to Todd, it's not just Todd, it would be anyone who's great at what they do
needs to be comfortable, or else you're not going to be as good as you can be. So, and it just so happens that the way Todd likes things is incredibly enjoyable for others to kind of witness and be a part of.
Podcasts are millennials' radio.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Just plain and simple. Radio's not coming back. And I sometimes wonder about what killed radio, why, obviously it's on demand. That's a big feature. But, in a lot of ways, everything's funneled down to these sort of primary sources for everything. I think people just got sick of that, the cookie cutter.
Mm-hmm.
So podcasts, they're not a fad. They're not going away.
Yeah, I think you're right on. Where the specificity of a podcast, I think, is what makes them so special. Where, like, you can't, what Todd does or what any other podcast does, if you pitch that to a radio station, it'd be like, who the hell is going to listen to this?
Right.
Like, I listened to a podcast the other day with former Houston Rockets center Yao Ming's agent. Like, I listened to a podcast with a Chinese basketball player's agent for an hour and a half the other day.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because I have very specific sports interests.
Right.
But if you pitch that to, like ESPN radio or whatever the local sports network is in Chicago, they're like, hey, we're going to have on this basketball player from 8 years ago's agent. They'd be like, this is the dumbest idea I've ever heard. No, it'll literally cripple our radio station if we put that on. But the issue is, or not the issue, but the thing is that with podcasts, there is an audience for almost everything. Like, no matter what you want to listen to. And that's why I think, like, I love podcasts so much. Or if, anyone, like, for instance, you and I have never met, and obviously I listened to a few, Spot listened through a few of the podcasts, and you're great, and you know what you're doing, and like, I called Todd, and I was like, hey, like, was that fun? He goes, yeah, it was great. So I obviously did some research on the podcast before, like, I talked to essentially a stranger, for an hour and a half. But in general, I almost always say yes, not that I'm the busiest person in the world, to podcasts, because it is such an intimate setting where you can connect with people in such a way that you can't do on radio, because there's commercials, there's an agenda to, get like a certain point of view across in a very like authentic or unnatural way. And podcasts are the most natural thing. And literally it's people spending time with you for an hour and a half. And I think that's what's so appealing, where people want their specific interests met as closely as possible. And podcasts can give that to them in a way that radio can't.
And sometimes the length of the conversation, sometimes it triggers the ability to, not go deeper, but I don't know. You just don't get that from the traditional shorter cycled interviews, like a BBC interview, where you actually don't speak to the actual person till you're recording, and you're all handled by a handler and producers, and everybody's got their questions pre-planned out. There's something sort of organic. Yeah. Where's your podcast?
Where's my podcast?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a great question. Honestly, I lost it a few years ago, and I cannot find the goddamn thing anywhere. I've had a few, which is a funny. I like to joke that my podcasts were canceled, which is a thing that doesn't happen. But I've had a few over the years, and I think that I can pinpoint what went wrong with every single one of them. The first one that I had, I tried to do a Mark Maron style interview show, and this was probably when I moved to LA. Oh, actually, maybe even before. No, I did it in Boston. So maybe like 8 years ago I started it, and I just didn't have the point of view yet to make it interesting. And my guests, though very, very funny, and some of them actually have become very successful, well known, people weren't going to tune in. I feel like people tune into a podcast for two different reasons: point of view, topic, or sorry, so I'm about to name three different reasons: point of view, topic, or guests. And I had no point of view, there was no topic, and my guests, no one knew who they were. So that's why, and I just didn't have enough time. I was in college and I wasn't totally committed to it. So I think the commitment was the issue with most of them. And then, yeah, that happened with a few others. And then the most recent one that I did was called You Booze, You News. And it was with my best friend and really funny comedian, Georgia Brooks, out here. And the premise of the podcast is that we would get drunk and do the news each week. And we deliver our opinions and deliver the news as drunk people. And we had trouble reading, which is an issue when you're delivering news. And we had issue, our speech would be slurred. And I think it was a very funny podcast. The problem is that we'd have to get drunk each week, and that's not sustainable, like, health-wise. You know, like, and it wasn't just like a couple of wines. Like, we'd have to get, like, fall down drunk to do this thing. And so the premise was not sustainable. So that had to stop because, you know, I'm in a long committed relationship. I have a dog. I have a career. I can't just get shit-faced drunk every Wednesday. So we stopped doing that. And now my buddy and I are pitching a sports podcast to a couple places that hopefully that works out. So, yeah, we'll see. I think I just need to find the right one and really, really make sure it's my priority, you know, because you can't half-ass a podcast because there's so many good ones out there. If you don't do it for a week or two, if it is a weekly podcast, people are just going to unsubscribe from it. So I think I really need to find something that I fall in love with and, you know, do it the way that it deserves to be done.
What's the Cracked podcast? I haven't checked that one out.
So that one is cracked.com.
Yeah.
Is like one of the biggest humor websites, I think, on the internet. And I think it started off as a magazine.
Yeah.
And that looks, honestly, of all, like, you know, the things that I've done in my career, I've gotten noticed from, or people have come up to me after shows and told me that they've heard me on that podcast more than anything else, which is crazy. Like, that's the listenership that thing has. So, yeah, I've done a bunch of live ones out here, and it's fun. It's a very intelligent, you know, like this podcast kind of thing where you do talk about, like, but different topics where the whole podcast we'll talk about, I'm trying to think of a recent thing, you know, like badasses from history, you know, and like you pick a person from history and, you know, talk about why they were a badass. So mine was Baron von Steuben, who was I think a Prussian drill sergeant that George Washington hired at Valley Forge during the 1700s. You know, like you could go so micro with it, which is, I think, a fun thing. I always feel like an idiot on that podcast because they bring in such intelligent people, and I have a very high intelligence, or a very high opinion of my own intelligence, but I still feel like an idiot whenever I do it. Maybe that's why they keep bringing me back. I don't know. But yeah, it's a great podcast.
We should get back to issues. And so I've come up with a new term for Trump, the bronze dong.
I love it. That's great.
It could be original. The bronze dong.
Yeah, it's good. I love it. You should trademark that.
Yeah, I'll just do that. I'll get right on that. So what the hell is going on in your country?
It is, I mean, it's still difficult to unpack. I think finally, maybe just this month, people are finally okay to start on stage. So I'm talking from a point of view as a stand-up where I think since he was inaugurated, maybe until this month, you couldn't even say his name on stage and have people hear the rest of what you were about to say, because it's such a polarizing thing where, I mean, I'm in as liberal as they come, as progressive as they come. So that's my point of view on it.
Yeah.
But then, so when I would perform in front of other like liberals and progressives, like out in Los Angeles, saying Trump would make people just sad. Just his name would really bum out the audience in a way that, and I don't think for months and months and years, God Christ, he's already been there for a fucking year. It's taken a year for people to actually be able to even process that he's there and that it's real. I think that was a huge thing, is that it's so unreal and incomprehensible to me, and I think a lot of other people, that even happened.
Okay.
So it's almost like a horrible traumatic, not almost, it was such a horrible and traumatic thing that you couldn't even comprehend it happening. And then I don't know if we were in denial or what it was. So whenever, for the first year, you'd bring up Trump's name on stage, you could have an incredibly intelligent take on it, but no one could even understand what the fuck you were saying because they couldn't even understand that he was president. So it's been such a very tough thing, and it's just like, and it's such a serious topic. I've never said this out loud before, but I think talking about Trump is almost as serious as bringing up a buzzword in like a serious topic like rape, or something like that, where as soon as people hear that word, it's so shocking and horrible that, and by the way, people are going to think I'm trivializing rape. This man sexually assaulted women and bragged about it. So it's not that far away from it.
Yeah.
And it is such a horrifying thing to talk about, just his stance towards immigrants and women and the LGBTQ community. It's just so upsetting on so many levels that you need to bring up Trump in such a responsible way on stage and talk about it in such an intelligent, responsible way. It almost makes it so, it's just an incredibly difficult thing to talk about and comprehend. I still don't even know what the fuck I'm talking about.
I heard so many comedians say in so many different interviews basically what you said, that it was a hot topic from Inauguration Day on. And I think that my confusion, I think you might have illuminated it a little bit, was I thought that meant that a certain portion of the audience was pro-Trump and would take offense to it. I wasn't really thinking about it in terms of, I think I'm going to call it a sort of cognitive dissonance, that people would have a visceral reaction just being reminded that this is a reality that's come to pass. So it's not that the audience was pro-Trump and you were offending them. It's that nobody could even believe that this was really happening.
Yeah, I think so. That was from my point of view. And I think visceral reaction is the perfect, that you said that perfectly. It is incredibly visceral, where you can't, with comedy or just actually with an intelligent conversation, you need to be able to take in information and process it. Where with a visceral reaction, like you said, there's no processing. It's like a guttural, reaction where just if someone like flipped you in the ear, you'd be like, what the fuck was that? That's basically what it's like every single time you bring up his name, or it can be even more painful than that for a lot of people. So as a straight white male, I'm not as, I'm incredibly empathetic, but I could never understand what it's like for for the groups that are directly affected by his hatred, how they feel whenever they hear his name. So, yeah, I think, but also from my point of view, and this is the thing, totally honest, I am mostly in liberal areas all the time. I've done a few shows, where I've done shows over the past year is like New York, Philadelphia, Boston, LA, San Francisco, Minneapolis is a liberal city, Portland, like a lot of these places. I did do a show in Charleston, South Carolina, but even as far as the South goes, that's an incredibly liberal city. So I think that anytime I've done a show where there have been a couple, and I think people who voted for Trump or support Trump, it's a way too where they feel, I think, attacked and almost insecure, where and again, it's so complicated to unpack, where I can't even surmise why you would vote for that guy. But if I voted for Trump and I didn't, but if I did, I'd be so insecure about it that if someone attacked, like, Trump's an idiot, anyone voted for him and is an idiot, I would get defensive. Mm-hmm. So I think people get very defensive if they voted for him, and it's just a mess. Wow. No matter, it's a lose-lose.
There's a point where, in terms of saving face, which we can all kind of, we make a mistake and we're going to back it up to a certain point. There's this threshold where, you got to admit you made a mistake. I wonder if that's where we are now.
I think
because
I wish we could get there. I wish. I hope. I wish that they could. I think that that's where it should be at. We're like, listen, we made a mistake, and there's nothing wrong with saying that. That would be incredible if people were evolved enough to admit that they made a mistake. But I just think that often, as you see when anyone's wrong, sometimes people double down and triple down and quadruple down on it, and then it just gets so lost that it's, they can't even, there's no room for growth there.
But right.
I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No, we're right at the point where I think we are starting to see the actual effects of these policies. So like those healthcare changes are starting to really kick in. Millions of people have been removed. They're separating parents from kids at the immigration, in the immigration battle. These things are starting to get into the media. His deals are only with oligarchs. But mind you, the economy gets better and better. So, but
yeah, that's the issue. Yeah, and I think that's what they'll point to too, is like unemployment for right now, unemployment right now in the United States is the lowest it's been in like a decade, maybe even more than that.
Right.
And it's and I think housing is like actually the median, whatever the average worth of a home is in the United States is the highest it's been in like 20 years.
Right.
So that's the problem, is that people don't necessarily know why that is.
Yeah.
I don't know why the hell that is. But when the administration can actually just point, like, listen, more jobs have been created in the past few months and decades. We're at unemployment, and Trump can take credit for that, but those are things that actually are set in motion years and years before.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, and it's
how's the trade war going to go? Yeah. How's the trade war going to go? You guys have just picked a fight with all your best friends.
Yeah.
Us included. And I wonder if it's helpful that actually your employment statistic, which I think is like 3.9 and 3.4 or something percent, almost unprecedented level of employment going on. I wonder if that's going to be an interesting marker, because here comes that statistic right on the verge of this new trade policy of implementing tariffs dollar for dollar. I wonder if that's going to be a benchmark from which we measure his success.
Yeah, I think it all goes back to causation, where I don't and by the way, I don't know this. Is the low unemployment rate being caused by the trade tariffs and the trade wars? I don't know. I don't think it is, but I don't know what I'm talking about. So
no, I'm suggesting that things are good right now, but now that you've picked a fight with almost every country in the world, those numbers will change, and I have a feeling it's not going to get better. This could be as good as it gets.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Yeah, I misunderstood you. That's 100% right. And it's just this nationalistic point of view where the Iran. He's pissing off NATO. It's just when you start to piss off every single one of your allies.
Yeah.
Germany has been an incredible ally, and it's been nothing but. Just seeing Chancellor Merkel's face when she's around this pig, it's just so hard. It's just so hard to watch. And that's what happens where, for diplomacy, the man lacks any tact or diplomacy whatsoever. So, for instance, let's just take all of his politics out. The man, just being around him, it's tough for other world leaders, because he has to be the king dog, the kingfish in the room. And that just doesn't bode well for diplomacy. That's not diplomatic. Being a loud, boisterous person amongst the other most powerful people in the world, it just doesn't bode well for negotiation, when negotiation's a two-way street and all he does is talk. So it's the worldwide relations that actually are one of the things that upset me the most about this administration, where
he ticked off Germany, and I think just yesterday he was complaining that we're all driving around in German cars, so he's going to put an end to that.
Yeah, I'm sure he was. Yeah, this is the thing. I actually had this conversation with someone the other day where obviously Jeff Bezos is his worst enemy in the world right now, for whatever, because he's another rich man, successful man. So he's picking a fight with Jeff Bezos, who, by the way, like Amazon owns the Washington Post, and that is a thing that, as a liberal, I don't like admitting this, but is that, the Washington Post has had some of the best Trump coverage, I think, of any of the newspapers in the United States. But the fact that their owner is having feuds with the president of the United States, it just doesn't look good. You know what I mean? Like, it's supposed to be an objective news outlet. And I think covering him has been so complicated, too. That's the thing that generally I would actually think is a conflict of interest for Bezos owning the Washington Post. But Trump is so disgusting. It's like, I can ignore that as a liberal. Like, I've been ignoring that thing that I generally would be very much against. But yeah, it's so...
It shifted
I'm
the
like
whole
rambling.
ethics of it all. Well, that's sort of what I'm kind of want to get at is this an anomaly, or is this a picture of future U.S. presidents to come?
I think this is the extreme. But and I'm scared. Like, it's actually scary to talk about. Where I just think that he is the extreme here. Where I don't know how much more ridiculous you can get than a talk show host.
Could get a Kardashian.
Yeah, a reality TV host.
Yeah.
But people talk about this is even more extreme. And here's the thing: I never thought Trump could ever be president. So I'm going to say people are talking about like Kanye West running for office, and it's like, oh no, he's a rapper. He would, like, he's so ridiculous. He can never gain office. And I honestly, this is going to sound terrible, but I stand behind this. I think Kanye West could totally get elected in the United States if he wasn't black, and that's the most fucked up part of it.
Right.
Is I think all the reasons that Kanye West shouldn't be president, it's that he is maybe crazy. He says racist stuff about his own race. I think those are all reasons why he's not qualified. There's another one. Those are all reasons why he should be president. The fucked up thing is that this country is just going to be too racist. The one thing that shouldn't preclude him from becoming president, I think, could. And I think, is a very strange thing to say. But
well, here's a scary part to this Trump question and how things will come in the midterms. The extent to which most of us were in this bubble, where we couldn't in a million years imagine that Trump would be president.
Right.
What if we're still in the bubble? His base just will not go away. He said he could shoot somebody out in the street and his base would cheer. We could just as likely still be in the bubble. And we will maybe be just as surprised in the midterms.
Yeah, I think and I agree. I think that the bubble is, I'm not sure if we're still in it. I think that we honestly probably are. I think you're right, which is scary. But I think, I'm not sure what's going to happen in the midterms. There have been some positive, I don't know if he was the representative in Alabama winning, the Democrat winning in Alabama. But there's the fact that guys like Roy Moore and other Republicans are still getting all these votes is really, really scary. And I think that in American politics in general, it's probably the same in other countries, where it generally goes, if there's a Republican president, there will be a Democratic House. If there's a Democratic president, there will be a Republican House. That's generally, give or take, how things go, where the pendulum swings back and forth because everyone gets sick of each party at some point or another. But I think what will really happen here is that America is becoming so much more diverse, and then so many of the liberals right now who may not be old enough to vote or might just be getting the right to vote, and then also so many the Latino population is growing so much, which are vast majority liberal, that I think in not these midterms, or maybe even the next one, but I see that pendulum actually stopping, and that a variety of the base or of this country's population will be liberal and Democratic voters. That there will be a period, it could be in 12 years, where for 24 years or 30 or whatever next year or 30 years, that you could have a Democratic president and a Democratic House for a 30-year period. And that's a prediction that is based off of some fact, but not enough for me to have a scholarly opinion on it. But I do really believe that, where I hope it starts sooner. But I think the youth in this country is really going to swing things around to a more liberal and progressive future.
Let me ask you this. This is offensive to an American. How can you have a democracy with two parties?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's not a true democracy. If it was, the popular vote would be what decides the presidency, for instance, and not the electoral college, which, is insane.
Another problem is, and this is true in Canada, where we we have more than two parties, so look at us. But when those parties vote in blocks, the argument, because there's sort of an argument in a house, whether it's a House of Commons or a House of Representatives, that every single person in the house is supposed to be equal because they've all been elected by their constituents. But everything these parties do is to make a hierarchy behind which lesser members follow, and then there's voting in blocks. And so the very act of the parties works against the concept of democracy. But when we make fun of Saddam Hussein having an election and there being only one ballot, having two, it's a bit of a challenge.
How much better is that?
It's a bit of a challenge.
I agree. And
the fact that we've gone this far without electing a crazy person is another. We've had some various crazy people be elected, but this is a moment. I wonder if there are scenario books in America, like what if Canada invades, or what if there's these scenarios. And I really am wondering about, there would have been scenario books for what if we had a president who was a Russian agent, or an idiot, or had a diagnosable condition like a narcissistic disorder, or any host of possible. Those scenario books, okay, I'd love to see those scenario books. But what are the new scenario books being written, I wonder, about a president that attacks the rule of law, that hires billionaires who are against, like, education to the Ministry of Education, and on and on and on and on.
Yeah, I think the main thing that is, or not the main thing, one of the many things that are frustrating about this is how long everything takes. So one thing that did make me feel better is, because I don't have, at 29, I don't really have, I love history, I read up a lot on history, but in my lifespan, I have no perspective on this whatsoever, obviously, and a lot of people don't, but I particularly don't. So one thing that helped put it in perspective a little bit is Watergate, and I listened to an interview with Barbara Walters, and she talked about, I'm going to get, like, my whole point here is predicated on how many years it took, and I don't know how many years it was. I think it was maybe 3 or 4 it took since the first story came in on Nixon's Watergate, but it took 3 or 4 years, and we're a year and a half into this. And so I really think that I don't think Trump can possibly finish his first term, but it's not going to be done in months. And I think that's, to get back to what we talked about earlier, how generations have changed, where everything is so immediate now. Like, you can immediately have anything. Like, you can go on an app, you order food, it's there in 20 minutes. Like, you want to find out what the capital of Croatia is, you can just Google it and you know right away. But so I think a lot of people, and myself included, are assigning this to Trump, where the investigation into him. But I think it's just going to take a lot of time, and that's how the government is set up. That everything takes so long. So I really think it's going to take at least another year and a half for a comeuppance to occur for him. But just because that's what history shows. Even with Watergate, it took that long.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it's just such an old system. We're getting back to how can you have a democracy with two parties? You can't. And then the fact, I think it's just a symbolic that we still use an electoral college, which was created hundreds of years ago because people just weren't educated enough to vote, basically was what it was. And you can argue that that's still an issue.
That's what I was going to ask. Have
yeah,
we
but now
failed?
Yeah.
I
think people...
One of my first memories was, when you're playing with the TV channel when you're like, I don't know, 8 or whatever on a Saturday morning, and or probably a Sunday morning. And I think once the cartoons ended for Sunday morning, if you flipped one more flip, you wound up with like Meet the Press or something that, a young child has no business watching. And I actually remember that the conversation was about, at a time probably like mid-70s, where there were really instituting changes in funding of education, and there were pundits on speaking about there would be long-term consequences to cutting education funding or harming public education. And I think one of the pundits actually suggested that it would one day have an effect on our ability to expect proper journalism and act on make well-informed, educated, critical thinking decisions, and it would affect the fabric of our democracy.
Interesting.
Have we arrived there? Let me give you an example. Here,
please.
Do you remember Rob Ford?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, Toronto mayor. I was obsessed with him.
Planetary News. Was mentioned on Kimmel. He was on Kimmel. The whole bit. Rob Ford.
Mm-hmm.
We are 6 days away from an election here in Ontario, and we are about to elect his brother, Doug.
Oh, no.
As not the mayor of Toronto, as the premier of Ontario.
Is that an equivalency to governor?
We get like 12-ish provinces, like states, let's say. And each one has a premier. And
so it is.
There's a legislation under each one, so there's really not much interface between the provincial and the federal governments. Once in a while, maybe a constitutional meeting could be held by all of them. But largely, they're separate. They've, in a lot of ways, is debatable. They've divvied up things that are federal and things that are provincial. So it's like a state legislature, in a sense.
That's incredible.
The top dog.
So he's the favorite to win.
He is. I think the last time I saw the polls, he's PC, so conservative, tall gas there. The Liberal government has been around here for I think about 10 years. So there's been a long run of a Liberal government, and much as you said. How there's usually a balance. So, I mean, traditionally in Canadian politics, if you have a conservative prime minister, then a province like Ontario might have a liberal. Another sort of dichotomy would be that if it was usually it would be like if there was a conservative in the federal government, a province like Quebec would have a liberal or something that was opposing it. So there is sometimes this balance created, but. So it's after a long swing of the Liberals. But right now the polls are that Doug Ford's PCs seem to be 1 percentage point ahead of the NDP. And the Liberals, who we're pretending we're all sick of, but it's actually been a pretty good government, is something like 12. So they're way down. Everybody hates them. But right now, Doug Ford, most of the election campaign was the extreme, like a leader by 10 or 15 points behind... ahead of the next person down, the NDP. So we were really on track to elect Doug Ford. And so, one kind of fantasy suggestion is that, we invented populism with Rob Ford and somehow exported him to the United States where Trump took over. And now we've re-imported populism back up here and we're about to elect Doug Ford. Who's a controversial character, He's a known drug dealer back in the 80s and has this crazy brother and spouts things like he's going to cut funding for the CBC, but that's federally funded, or he's going to fire the head of the entity that does our electricity here, but they sold it off, so they don't have the power to. I mean, every single thing. We had a green belt that was surrounding Toronto. It was a big deal. That's going away. Like it's the same as Trump. It's all the same message.
I think
conservative.
So basically, he said that he would do things that he can't legally do.
Oh, he's an idiot. It's just another idiot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. I think that to me is the soapbox I get on about voting and what's going on right now, is that I think, and fact checking is a word that's thrown around. No matter how good or accurate it is, it just loses meaning. So people just stop listening to it, in my opinion. So I think just even fact checking is the word, but just people's willingness to look up if something's true, research if something's true, I think is the main issue in how these things keep happening. Where Trump will say that he's going to go do this thing, but he didn't do it, or he cannot do it. But people won't look that up because it's boring and it's more work. So I think that that's the issue, is the lack of willingness to find out if things are true or not. And then what compounds that subject is because, and I can only speak upon the United States, is that when you go look something up, even if you're willing to take that step, it's hard to find the truth because everyone is so politically, everyone just has biases. Yeah. So it's hard to find an actual fact without political bias in it. So it's almost finding the truth or finding out facts is almost impossible, which is how this, I think, keeps perpetuating itself. Is that if you don't know what's true and what's right and what's wrong, then, I mean, obviously there's people who are more intelligent than others, but if you don't know, then how can you make an informed decision? It's very hard for people to get informed, and people aren't even trying to, and I think that's a big issue.
So I wonder, but the sort of title of the show, the TMI, this is sort of an example of too much information.
Yes, yeah, it is. And the wrong information often as well.
How do you write your comedy? What do you draw from? All this chaos?
Poorly. I do it very poorly. No, sorry. What do I draw from? Mostly just personal experiences.
Yeah.
And I've been getting more observational lately because. So one, I think starting early has been an incredible thing for me in that I know how the business works, and performance-wise, I have really good stage legs underneath me where I think I was naturally a good performer. I think I'm a much better performer than I am a writer at this point, but the writing has come along because I think by getting older, I now have a point of view in life experience. I know that's coming from a 29-year-old. What the fuck does he know? But I know more than I did 13 years ago when I started. So 16, the things that I could observe were standardized tests and getting a driver's license, which is not relatable to literally anyone in the audience because they did that. The average audience at a comedy club 33, or mid-20s or something. And I'm talking about shows. Why would anyone give a shit about that stuff? But now that, I've had many failed relationships and, I've had, a college experience and experience death and loss and, adversity and stuff in my life. And by the way, I'm not even close to the life experience that I'll have, when I get older. But now I'm starting to hit the age where I can actually feel confident to comment on things. So my writing experience will be generally if I say something absurd or I have some sort of point of view about something, I'll write it down, and then I tell a lot of stories. So stories with jokes interspliced in. So I saw a dog today. It had big ears. And then talk about the ears, make a reference about ears. Obviously, it's not a joke that I'm doing, I would hope. But yeah, it's generally writing down a life story and then adding jokes to it or finding out what's funny about that story and commenting on it. And then interweaving that into a story. But now I've been working on more observational things about, life in general. And so that's been kind of an exciting thing for me, where now that I'm a little older, I can actually speak to the points of views and sensibilities of the audience, which I have had the luxury to be doing it for so long. I haven't been able to really explore that yet.
So your comedy content might switch from, as you said, young adult things like the DMV to complaining about
Right.
leaf blowers and weed whackers and
Right. Yeah. Or like buying a car, or like leasing a car or something. Like that's the thing where I only in the past couple of years I've had to go to a car dealership and haggle with someone for 8 hours about price and stuff. And then to turn that into a bit, so that's a relatable experience that a lot of people have. But then to turn that into a bit, I add my point of view where I don't know what financing is. I don't know what makes a good car. But I have enough time in my day, I can just argue with this person where they probably don't even know what the fuck they're talking about. So you can kind of go deeper and deeper into something. I think that's a new thing I'm excited about, is taking something broader, like getting a car or moving in with a girl or something like that, but then go so deep and micro into it, it turns into my own experience.
I've
Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I've wondered if some comedians, they estrange themselves from normal people, and they observe these normal people as fodder for their comedic material, and in a way estrange themselves from normal people. What do you think of that? I mean, that's where you're drawing it from other people's rat race, and you're talking about drawing the material from your own life experiences. Maybe that's sort of telling.
Yeah, I think it is. I think, so right now, my style right now is like talking about my own life experiences, but I am now starting to get into others, because I actually think a normal rat race lifestyle is actually way stranger and funnier than something that's like quote unquote unique or whatever, because everyone's out of their goddamn mind. Like I'll see like a normal guy in a business suit and a briefcase, like waiting at a crosswalk to cross the street, and he'll hit the button to cross like maybe 18 or 20 times, just hitting the button over and over again. And this is someone who is on all, is the most normal looking person, but it's like, no, everyone is so strange. Like that guy in his mind is going to hit that button 20 times because he needs to have some sort of control over his life. And that control that he needs is to control traffic to cross the street. But everyone's nuts. Like, I really don't think anyone's boring, because everyone is just so crazy. Like, and even a quote unquote boring life is incredibly interesting to me. It's like, all right, so you go to work and you're just okay, like people get drunk, like someone who they need to get drunk because that's the most interesting thing that's going to happen in their day, and they'll get access to thoughts, that they wouldn't allow themselves to have access to. It's just an odd example, but yeah, like an office, for instance, an office Christmas party, just a general office, like a worker bee job. Whenever they have their parties, someone always gets super drunk and vomits on themselves, like every single time, or yells something racist, or like tries to like make sexual advances, on another coworker. And it's because people have such pent up energy where, yeah, everyone's crazy. Everyone has like weird demons. Everyone's nuts. Everyone does bizarre shit and makes bad decisions. Like, it's just it's all very, very interesting to me.
Recently now, the last thing that's going on in comedy of note is this Samantha Bee is now being attacked.
Right.
And I think Kathy Griffin was making comment on that. It's great, the Me Too, and it's great this new era we're in. It's unfortunate it doesn't apply to Republicans or Trump, but
right.
Are we about to hit some kind of limit on this? I mean, my analogies are all confused, but the whole point of comedians crossing the line is to always be illustrating to us where the line is. So we have to be kind of forgiving, I think. But we're at this point now where, people keep arguing and warning, oh, we're coming close to violating the principles of freedom of speech. There's some danger I sense because, we're just a minute away from not being able to say anything.
Yeah, I think this is a very, very complicated thing for me because being a stand-up comedian, that part of my life, I like that part of me believes that you should be able to say anything at all and there shouldn't be consequences. But then there's the human being aspect of me where I do understand why certain things shouldn't be said. So I think that, to address, I'm going to address like the Samantha Bee thing, and then I'll address like my general feelings on this stuff, I think, if that works, where Samantha Bee called, I'm going to use a bad word right now, called Ivanka Trump a cunt. And that was being compared to Roseanne making a very racist joke about a former Obama aide. What was her name? Do you remember her name? I'm sorry, I can't even remember her name. I feel so bad.
Oh, VC is all.
Yeah, the Planet of the Apes joke that she made, which is. So here's how I feel about those words. This is a very, very microcosm where I think you need to consider context, and I think you need to consider I think you need to consider context. I think you need to consider where the person's coming from when they said it. I think you need to understand what their goal was with that joke. Yeah, because they are jokes with that joke. And I think you need to consider who's being hurt and how they're being hurt. So with calling someone a cunt is a attack on women. So that's calling someone a bad woman. And I think the more specific a joke gets, the meaner it is. So if you called a woman a cunt, I think that's actually not as bad as calling someone fat or ugly, because fat or ugly is more specific to you. If that makes this is just my theory. Yeah. So if you call a woman a cunt, that is worse, on the other hand, than calling someone an asshole, because anyone can be an asshole. Mm-hmm. So that is not gender specific. And then if you call a guy a dickhead, I think in general, also male insults, it considers the hierarchy of how society views people as well. So men are at the top of the hierarchy for, according to society, they just are. So the way people see them. So I think that since men are in the power seat, you can get away with way more calling a man a dickhead, calling a man an asshole. I think making fun of men, and then white men as well, where if you call, there's a racial term for white people called honky or something.
Or
so
a cracker.
Or a cracker.
Yeah.
So that's not nearly in the same fucking galaxy as using a racial term for someone who's not in the power seat. So I think it depends on who you're making fun of. What Roseanne said was offensive to a black woman. And unfortunately, they don't have as many opportunities right now as white men, white women. So she's punching down in the hierarchy, which makes it so much more unacceptable. And by the way, this is just coming from my point of view. I can't speak to how women or people, people of other races would consider this. From my point of view, Roseanne punched down on another race. And that, to me, is far more disgusting than a woman calling another woman a bad name for women. So, and that woman, by the way, who's being insulted is at the height of power. So Samantha Bee was punching up, where she was making fun of someone who's more powerful than she is. And Roseanne was punching down, which is, in society, everything should be equal in a perfect world, but unfortunately it's not. So that's why I think it's a false equivalency. It's just 100% a false equivalency, where it's not the same. Samantha Bee calling a woman, calling another woman a bad name for women is very different than a white woman calling a black woman a racially charged term. It's just different. So I think that the conservatives are making a false offense, where in a vacuum, if Samantha Bee just called Ivanka Trump a cunt, then yeah, they'd be like, all right, that's fucked up. But it's not more fucked up than a white woman using a racial term for a black woman. It's just not. So anyway, that's my opinion on that.
No, beautifully explained. The sort of ironic part of it is how Trump now is calling for Samantha Bee's head.
Yeah, he's disgusting. The biggest bully. I mean, the fact that Melania Trump is working on like anti-bullying campaigns.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not. You can't even make a joke about that because it's just so unreal. Like that should be the joke. That should be a thing. Like, oh, how funny it would be if Melania was doing an anti-bullying campaign, cyberbullying. But no, it's fucking real. That's happening. So it's just so crazy. I really do think that, very, very generally speaking, that anyone should be able to say whatever the fuck they want, but people are allowed to disagree with them and say that they hate it and give them shit for it. Now, when it gets complicated, so for instance, this happened a few years ago where I think Daniel Tosh made a rape joke at the Hollywood Improv, and people tore him apart for it. And I don't remember what the joke was. It may have been clever. It may not have. It doesn't matter what the joke was. He made a joke that I don't know if it was funny or not. I don't remember what the joke was, but he made an edgy joke. He's allowed to make that joke. People are also allowed not to like it. So I think that that's fine. Like, if people like it, then they can keep being a fan of his. And if they don't, then don't go see Daniel Tosh. Don't watch his shows. Like, whatever you think of him. It doesn't matter. If you like him, watch him. If you don't, fucking don't. If you hate him, say you hate him. If you like him, say you like him. Like, I just think people are allowed to hate and like things. They don't have to make people share the same opinion as they have. Now, where it gets complicated is when it affects people's jobs. So I think, for instance, I'm trying to think of. So let's just take Roseanne, for instance. She said something incredibly racist, and she's employed by ABC, and that employer, ABC, is owned by Disney. Let's just say some companies are okay with racists being employed by them. ABC, a Disney-owned company, is not okay with you saying racist shit and being like an employer. So I believe that ABC has a right to fire her for saying that, because they're not firing her from comedy. They're firing her from that show. Yeah. So I actually think, and a lot of comedians would disagree with me, but I think ABC has every right to do that because they're employing her. Now, if you're doing a stand-up comedy show at like a theater and Roseanne said something racist and the theater fires her, I think that's tougher, because I think the theater should, the right way would be like, if people canceled tickets to see her, then that would be why they would fire her.
What if it said on the ticket at a comedy venue that you waive the right to complain, sue for damages, take exception, you understand that it's a comedy show, things will be said, the purpose of the comedian is to find and cross the line, and all of these ideas. It said clearly on the ticket, you cannot take offense to, once you walk into the room and the show starts. I mean, I would have always thought that was just implied, and if you, as you sort of say, if you don't like the show, then you don't go to the next comedian's venue. I mean, would that help?
So I totally think that it should be implied as well, but I think that that's a great point. Is I think that should, if you're putting that on the ticket, I think that that's the perfect thing to do, as long as you give them the opportunity before entering to not go in and get their money back. Like, I think that satisfies everyone, where literally, all right, here, if you're going in here, and often comedy clubs do make that announcement, like they have a sign. I've seen a lot of comedy clubs actually with a similar sign, like on the door, that you'll say. A lot of really good comedy clubs have that. And often great stand-up clubs where they're like, I didn't like, like someone just comes like, hey, I'd like my money back. Like, I really hated this person. They offended me. A lot of comedy clubs will just give them their money back, So I think that that's the perfect thing, where it's, as long as you know what you're getting.
You're only offended up to the, $20 ticket price. It's pretty shallow that you're going to feel much better once you have your $20 back.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not, I agree. And I'm someone personally where I don't word, like there's no, and by the way, this is coming from a straight white male, there's no word really that can upset me. But I don't have the same experience and the same past as a lot of people. So if I can only trust, and that's the thing too, like if someone with a different point of view and a different culture than I have has a different reaction to something, like, yeah, trust them. You know, if someone's like, oh, wow, that word really, really hurt me, that's a racial slur of my group or a bigoted term to the group that I live in, then just trust them and give them the right to remove them. But then they should also just remove themselves, you know, and then ask for their money back, and then they should never see that person again and go see someone that they like. So, yeah, it's a delicate balance where I don't think anyone should ever have to be hurt by words and, you know, like be put in an awkward situation. So I think that making sure everyone knows what they're getting into and are treated appropriately after that is the most important thing to do.
You have a weekly show, Friendship Buddies, in LA.
Yes, I do. Every Sunday, myself, and I just started helping my friends from, two of my friends from Philly moved out here, and they've been running it for about a year, and then my third friend, Pat Barker, who's a very funny stand-up, ended up letting me take his spot on it because he's doing this thing called fatherhood or something, like he has a son, so his time is a little more constricted, so I took his place. Basically, we do it every Sunday at this really fun bar called Verdugo Bar in Los Angeles. And yeah, it's great shows. Like we just put up like a lot of great comics on them, and it's every Sunday, and it's just cool to each week. It's a fun hangout because it's a great bar, but also just having that set every Sunday to work out new material before, you know, I try it on like a bigger stage has been a really great thing for me personally.
I noticed on YouTube there's quite a few little snippets of your stand-up.
Yes.
Is there a centralized place to find that, if somebody in particular who posts your sets? Or do you just...
Yeah, if you go on my website, blakewexler.com, there's a video section, and I put, like, my favorites up there. So generally it's stuff that I've uploaded myself. Sometimes I generally don't like when people upload my stuff because either I am not finished it sometimes, and they put it up before it's ready. I'm like, I wish, you know, I could have presented it to the world when it's finished. Yeah. Or like the ad revenue, if God forbid it gets more than 10 views, someone else will get it instead of me. But yeah, it also, I'm not big enough yet where that's that big of an issue. But yeah, if you go to blakewexler.com and right there are all my videos. There should be like 8 or so up there. And then I have another album coming out in September that I'm releasing through Audible Comedy Records, and that's like going to be a brand new hour that I'm really excited to share.
You got a title for that yet?
It's called Stuffed Boy, and yeah, it's coming out in September. I recorded it in April, and Todd actually opened it, which was really fun.
How do we find you on social media?
At Blake Wexler on everything. So yeah, at BLAKEWEXLER. I'm very active on Twitter and Instagram, and yeah, Facebook.com/Blake Wexler. But yeah, the Twitter is where it's at, and there's a link to my album on there, and then on my website there's a link to Todd and I's album, 12 Years of Voicemails, which is cool. It's not stand-up, it's just literally voicemails, and it's a fun listen.
And how should local law enforcement find you?
My address is they'll find me. I generally tweet where I'm at, so yeah, it's not too hard.
I noticed there's some spray painting on sidewalks.
Yeah, that's this bit I'm doing. No, yeah, near my place, there's this guy who just keeps spray painting messages to this woman who left him, and I didn't intend for it to be a bit at all. But I just keep finding new spray paint. It's actually in my personal life one of my favorite things, where this guy just keeps spray painting, "I miss you," like, "Why did you leave me?" So keep an eye out for that. That's not really a comedy project I'm working on. Okay. It's more of a huge bummer that this man, there is some guy out there who clearly lost a woman who's very important to him, and he's trying to get her back through spray paint on Los Angeles sidewalks. So yeah, I'm just documenting it.
All right.
I'm a journalist.
Gotcha.
Find us on Twitter @thatarcher. Send us an email, archer@twxnet.com. For guest links and contact info, visit our podcast page, tmi.twxnet.com. Find us on Android and Apple Podcast apps. Subscribe and rate the show on iTunes.
I'm Dave Archer in Toronto.
And I'm Blake Wexler in Los Angeles, California.